Okay, so we are in What is the Good News? Part 15. Awesome. Okay, so for those of you that this is your first part listening, you're kind of out of luck. No. Hopefully you'll understand what we're talking about, even though you haven't heard the other 14 parts, and you might be inspired to go back and listen to them, okay? But we are talking about this thing called the good news, because this is something that you've heard mentioned throughout your life, especially if you came through Christianity, is this idea of sharing the good news. The problem is that it's always been a somewhat either very limited or ambiguous sort of term or phrase. Like, what is this good news we're supposed to be sharing? The very limited version of it is, Messiah has come, died, and was resurrected, which is very good news, but it's very limited to what the good news is about. Or it's very ambiguous as to, share the good news. What does that even mean? I don't think they really teach much about that, okay? So we've started looking into it and found that there was a lot of looking forward to this idea of a good news in the Old Testament. And we covered that for a good couple of parts to see that this is not a new concept or a New Testament concept. But we see the fulfillment of some of the things they were looking forward to in the Old now being spread as, hey, these things are happening or have happened. This is good news. Some of the things we've been looking forward to, it's good news. Also, good news to those who never knew anything is that, hey, by the way, there's a process to get you into relationship with your Creator. Okay? And so the good news is the positive, forward-looking message from above. Okay? That's simple. So it's not limited to just talking about Messiah coming in the flesh and dying and being resurrected, although that did provide such incredible opportunities for us in terms of an eternity that we can have access to, right? That being said, though, okay, this positive, forward-looking message is all kinds of things that he said were going to be forward-looking messages, like the promise even to Abraham that he'd be the father of many nations. That's good news. But when Yeshua comes, part of that good news is, hey, he's starting to do this gathering of these scattered people that he also promised, after I scatter you, I'll regather you. So we got all kinds of promises that people were listening for and waiting for good news. Hey, this is going on now. This is happening. So it's a very broad topic. It's got a lot of depth to it that you may never have understood. So this forward-looking message from above is delivered by one who is anointed and appointed in the role of a prophet to deliver the message. And I say the role of a prophet, I don't mean it has to be some sort of a formal thing like, a Jeremiah or an Isaiah or something, but a person who is speaking the word with authority from above. And we see this mentioned in Ephesians 4 when it mentions of the 5 roles of ministry, this fivefold, these different roles, one of them is prophet, okay? Which is the one who's speaking the word with authority, generally to people that already understand. So they're not the initiating of the information. The prophet is talking to those who should know and speaking with authority to get your attention. Hey, you should know better. You should know this. You should be excited about this. Look forward to this. He's talking to, it's like preaching to the choir is a phrase, right? He's talking to people that should know. The teacher may be teaching new people what they don't know yet. Okay, so you have that. But the prophet's speaking to people that should know. Okay? Now, but sometimes the prophet is speaking to those who don't know when they're in a mixed crowd of people that should know. The whomsoever wills, they come, where the new person goes, what was that? The person's like, that sounded interesting. What was he saying? And talking to somebody maybe who's understanding what's going on. What's going on here? Okay? There's an opportunity to have a relationship with the creator of all things. How does that work? Okay? Okay, now, so we are now in 2 Corinthians. Okay, I think we finished 1 Corinthians, we're now in 2 Corinthians, and we're going to be in chapter 4, and then we're actually going to go back into chapter 3 because I want to make sure we're getting some context here. But we're going to read the verses in chapter 4 that sort of launch us into this whole idea of good news. But you'll see that there's some issues going on. So in verse 3, it says, and indeed, if our good news has been veiled, it has been veiled in those who are perishing, Okay, in whom mighty one of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that the enlightening of the good news of the esteem of Messiah, who is the likeness of Elohim, does not shine on them. Whoa, that's pretty serious stuff. So what's that all about? This veiling or unveiling and revealing of this good news, and this idea that it's been veiled, okay? So I think to understand that, we really need to go back to at least chapter 3. Probably go back to the beginning of chapter 1, but we're going to speed this up a little bit. And let's go back to chapter 3 to kind of get some context, okay? Because we have to understand, as always, I try to give you some insight about this idea of context, okay? And when you're reading anything written, one of the things that we have to do to get context is ask a lot of questions. Questions like, why is this even being discussed? What is the issue being addressed? See, when we're reading the Tanakh, we're reading a lot of accounts of things that happened, all right? Here, though, when we're dealing with Paul's letters, he's writing because he's addressing something that's going on, something that's maybe confused or whatever, but he's addressing something. And so we have to ask the question, why is this an issue? What is the issue? It's another question. What is the issue he's trying to address? And so he's saying here something about something being veiled and something being revealed and people perishing and all this other stuff. What is the issue that he's addressing here? So we begin in chapter 3, and it starts off with, again, part of Paul writing in these different letters is he's making a case. I know we talked about this before. It's shocking to me in some ways and completely understandable in others that all ministry people at some point need to make a case for why they're actually in ministry. It's just the reality of it. I don't know if I should say it's sad and unfortunate, but it's true, right? So here he goes. Are we to begin to recommend ourselves again? There he goes. Or do we need, as some, letters of recommendation to you or from you? He's like, we do what we do. He says, you are our letter, having been written in our hearts, known and read by all men, making it obvious that you are a letter of Messiah, served by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living Elohim, not on tablets of stone, but on fleshly tablets of the heart. And such trust we have toward Elohim through the Messiah. He's saying, look, the evidence is in the work we're doing and that you're doing. The work we're doing to serve you and the work you've done taking that guidance and applying it. This is our proof, our evidence, our letter of recommendation. He says, now that we are competent in ourselves, not that we are competent in ourselves to reckon any matter as from ourselves, but our competence is from Elohim. Again, he's making this claim. This is not me, it's from Elohim. He's anointed and appointed me to do this. Okay, that's a phrase that I maybe coined more than most, this idea of anointed and appointed. But I think that's a very good way of describing those that Yahweh's using, okay, are those that he will anoint with a special gifting or talent or ability to communicate and serve on his behalf, and he then appoints them to that role and appoints them to a group of people to apply that role to, right, to do those things. Now, he says, so it's not that we are competent in ourselves, but the competence comes from Elohim. Now notice that Paul is still taking credit for doing his part. He's saying this, it came from above, but I'm doing my part. You are the result and proof that I've been doing my part, he's saying. You are the letter of recommendation. You're evidence and proof that I've been doing my part right. Okay, that it's been bearing fruit. So now it gets a little bit interesting as he starts going into what some of the issues really are. He goes, so our competence is from Elohim, who also made us competent as servants of a renewed covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. So this is where we start getting into this whole, well, the law kills, but the Spirit gives life. And if you don't understand the phrase or what he's trying to say, you could certainly, I guess, get to that conclusion. But now let's read more so we can kind of get a sense of why he's using this phrase, and we'll go back and try to unravel it a little bit. He says, if the administering of death in letters engraved on stones was esteemed. So he's trying to explain to you some of what we get from the Torah, which he's talking about was written on tablets, he says, if that was honored and esteemed, if that received glory, so to speak, right, whichever word you're used to using for that, he says, if that administering was esteemed so that the children of Israel were unable to even look steadily at the face of Moshe because of the esteem of his face, which was passing away. So he's trying to say, again, now what's passing away, you had somewhat of a covenant that we see with Noah. We could even point to an Adamic covenant, a Noahic covenant, an Abrahamic covenant, a Davidic covenant. You could point to different covenants along the way. Each one, the previous one, passed away to now be replaced by the next one. But they're always inclusive of the previous one. There's never a doing away with the previous one's information, requirements, and understanding. There's things that are built on top of, clarifications, more details, things like that, okay? This is why you have, like in Jeremiah 31, in verse 31, it says that there would be a renewed covenant between Yahweh and the house of Israel, not like the old one, but a new one that would be written on their hearts. But it would not be removing and doing away with everything in the previous one, because we don't see that play out anywhere in Scripture. We see them foundationally as building blocks. You start off with the Adamic and then the Noahic and Abrahamic and Davidic, and then we get to Moses as along the way, the Moshe covenant, right? So I didn't put that all in the right order, but you understand what I'm saying, okay? All right, we have all of these, and each one is a stepping stone to the next one. But nothing in the previous one gets wiped out, okay? So again, what is Paul dealing with? Same thing he's been dealing with in a lot of the letters to the different congregations. The challenge talking to those that are confused about one or two very serious issues for them. Serious issues for us too, I suppose, which is, what do you do coming from a strict, mechanical, Torah-observant community background of Judaism at this time? Okay, without so much of the spiritual aspect, meaning the underlying intent of the law, the spirit of the law, the depth of the intent, which is what Yeshua's first, message was. Of old it says this, and now I'm going to give you the deeper spiritual intention of that. So when Yeshua says, of old it says, do not commit adultery, and then he said, let me give you the spiritual intention. Did he wipe out the idea of adultery? No, he built upon it, right? When he said, of old it says don't murder, did he get rid of the idea that don't murder is a problem? Or did he build more on top of it, clarify and give you the intention of the commandment not to murder? So as we go higher in the levels of covenant, it actually becomes more clarified, more detailed, and deeper in our understanding of the intention of the commandment in the first place, okay? You could mechanically keep Shabbat and just think, okay, I'm not working, so I keep Shabbat. But you wouldn't understand that it's not about not working, it's about actively being available for covenantal relational stuff on that day with your Creator and with each other. Where if you were working, you wouldn't be available for that. So it's about set apart time with a purpose, not just set apart so it's different than other time. It's listed in Leviticus 23 as one of the Mikra Kodeshim, okay, which is a commanded assembly meeting, like a date, okay, with your Creator. And so you can take the mechanical part of Shabbat. Okay, so I don't cook and I don't work and, I'm resting or whatever, and you'll miss the deeper levels of understanding if that's all you do, right? But you're not going to take that away, which is what you see in, unfortunately in Christianity, you see that taken away. They took Saturday, moved it to Sunday, and then they didn't even just take Saturday and move it to Sunday. It's no longer like Saturday. They don't keep it for 24 hours. They don't restrict any of the behaviors except that you should go to services, okay? Which, by the way, there really is not a commandment to do that, so to speak. There are lots of things that hint at it, like the not forsaking the assembling together. And we see them because it's a Mikra Kodesh, that it's a commanded gathering. So they gather. And then an hour later or less, they're done and they go off and do whatever they're going to do all day. Okay? And I don't know if I should applaud this or not, but there was one Christian ministry I saw one time was doing a teaching on the 10 Commandments. And I will give him credit for at least getting this much. When he got to Commandment 4, he didn't teach Saturday, so I'm not giving him credit for that. He taught Sunday, but he said we should be keeping it all day. Okay, some light bulb went off a little bit, because don't tell me you're keeping Sunday as the Sabbath if you're not keeping it as a Sabbath. Okay, you can't do a Sabbath for an hour. The Sabbath is a day, okay? It's the name of the seventh day. We call it Shabbat. Matter of fact, in a lot of languages, Saturday in their language is actually a version of the word Shabbat. Okay, right? Sábado, right? In Spanish, it's Shabbat or Sabbath. So it's the name of the day. It's what the day is. All right? So Paul is dealing with people coming from a couple of different perspectives. You've got the Jews and the Gentiles. This is always their problem. Not because there's anything wrong with a Jew or a Gentile. They're just coming at this from very different perspectives and also different comfort levels, different interests and desires, and that filters how they want to see covenant or how they want to see their relationship with Messiah and the Creator. And there's always, because of that difference, there tends to be this clash. There's this clashing, okay? I did it this way, like they're coming together. Really, there's a clashing that's happening there. And so he's having to address this again. And he does it in almost every letter. And when we finish 2 Corinthians here, which might take us at least through this part or next, we're going to get into Ephesians, where the same theme is happening, okay? The same theme is playing out. And some of you will be like, well, wait a minute, somehow you skipped Galatians when you do that. Well, yes, I did, because Galatians may have to be dealt with separately. It's got so much to unravel, I'd rather not necessarily do it in this teaching, okay? We'll do it. I just don't want it to take so much time that it's really beyond, the scope of this teaching. All right, so I'm thinking about it. Right now I'm planning to skip it, and we'll see where we go. So in chapter 3 here, all right, so he says this idea of the letter kills, the spirit gives life. What he's trying to say is the letter of the law, if you just do the letter and don't do what it intends, it just leaves you with death. Life comes from the spirit of the law, okay? Yahweh does not want to spend forever with someone who never murdered anybody but wanted to. Okay? Doesn't want to spend forever with somebody that didn't pick any of the commandments, but wanted to. Okay? They missed the point. They kept Shabbat, they didn't work, they didn't cook, whatever it is you want to say is Shabbat stuff, but they didn't delight in it. They didn't covenant, they didn't relate, they didn't do the things that they're supposed to do. That's the spirit of it. Okay? Is putting aside, they didn't put aside all the cares and the concerns of worldly everyday life to be refreshed and rest in the day and focus on their vertical relationship, as well as the community of people that are working on their vertical relationship. So communing with and spending time with those who are also walking this out. And so when he's talking about the letter kills, but the spirit gives life, a lot of people sort of kept the letter, still ended up dead in the desert, Lots of people over time, were basically saying, well, I kept the letter of all these things, but you were missing the point of them. What is the point of them? What is the point of Torah keeping? What? Transformation. Okay, becoming like him is what she was saying, okay? The whole point is transformative, okay? It's transformative. So if you're not looking at it and you're not transforming, looking at it from that right perspective, it's just mechanical. Okay? Now what also the Torah does is when it says the letter kills, the letter tells you what kills you. The spirit tells you what brings life. So it's not that the Torah kills you. The Torah says, if you don't do these things, they bring death. The Spirit says, if you do these things the right way with the right intention, it brings life. Now, of course, Paul's using his own way of speaking these things, so it gets a little confusing. But if you read the context, you'll see and understand this is what he's dealing with again. Okay? There are those that were coming from a very somewhat Essene, one of the other different denominations of Judaism at the time, that looked at things all about rituals and mechanics. Okay? Not that we shouldn't have certain rituals and mechanics, but they weren't looking beyond that. It was just rituals and mechanics. Okay? They weren't seeing and understanding the whole point. All right? So it'd be like, for example, I don't even know if this is a good example or not, but it somehow popped in my head, so I'll use it. Once upon a time, I was a sensei. I taught martial arts, okay? And of course, I just lost half the people like, that's evil, that's this, that. You know what? Go watch a different channel. Okay, so, but when I taught it, I could have just taught people how to kick and punch. But that would not have done anything that they really needed without teaching them how to avoid getting kicked and punched. You see? And so teaching the mechanics, this is how you throw a punch and how you make a fist, this is how you do a block or whatever, those mechanics would be great. But if I don't teach them the philosophy of, but you want to try to avoid the fight in the first place, then again, that's another level. So even if I teach them how to punch and how to block, I really need to teach them the mindset that avoids even needing to do that, which I did when I was a teacher, but not all teachers do. They were teaching you how to fight. So the mechanics or the letter of martial arts causes people to go out and fight. I've seen lots of guys go to schools where I saw them out there all the time wanting to show off and cause fights and see if they could use their stuff and everything else. I taught everybody that they should never use their stuff. Okay? I remember after being a black belt for a while, people would come up to say, when they find out I was a black belt, they go, oh yeah, how often have you had to use it? I said, every day. They're like, what? I said, yeah, every day. What do they mean? To avoid ending up in a fight. I mean, because they wanted to know how many fights I got in and how I did. I listed a bunch of fights I avoided, situations that certainly could have ended up in an ugly mess. I might have won, I might have lost, I don't know. I avoided it, you understand? Which means I won, because I avoided the conflict, okay? So Yeshua is saying, you know, it's okay, so you didn't murder somebody, but if you can't figure out how to deal with your anger and your hate and those kind of things, what are you gonna end up doing at some point anyway? So do you just need should I give you a good job on you didn't kill anybody? But what kind of person are you gonna be in the kingdom if you're angry like that, just because you don't explode on everybody by hurting them, but maybe with your mouth or some other thing you might do? But how are you treating people if you're always angry? And so there's no verse that says that thou shalt not be angry. It's not a commandment. But Yeshua says it's built into a commandment. Because Yeshua wants to deal with the spirit above the letter or beyond the letter, which is what is the underlying causality of the action? The underlying cause, okay? Well, I said causality, but yes, the cause, okay? The underlying cause of the action. Murder doesn't come out of joy and happiness. It doesn't come out of love and peace or any other piece of the fruit of the Spirit, okay, or part of the fruit of the Spirit. But it does come out of anger, bitterness, resentment, and all these other ugly emotional places. And so he wants you to deal with the underlying part of it, which is the spirit of it, the higher level of it, the more, beyond the mechanical part of it, okay? Above and beyond the mechanics of it. And so here's Paul saying, look, he made us competent as servants of this renewed covenant, okay, to give you above and beyond, not just of the letter, he said, which brings death, okay, which kills, but of the spirit, which gives life. So we're here to tell you beyond the letter, because if all we give you the letter, you're just gonna end up dead. The letter does not bring life. okay? Now, it may make for a somewhat better society if people aren't stealing or killing each other, but the society is still gonna have issues if you're still, wanting to do all those things, even if you don't do them, okay? Anybody ever lived in a house where people wanted to kill each other but didn't? Was it fun? And we've all done that. We've all lived with people where it was, nobody was actually physically hitting each other, maybe, but boy, the attitude and the words and the looks and the feeling and the energy was just awful. But mechanically, nothing was happening, okay? Now, he's continuing. He said, just to be clear, if they were giving such high esteem to the letters written in stone, which gave you the mechanics, which are the foundation, Yeshua is giving you above and beyond understanding the mechanics, how they should be applied and looked at, okay, the spirit of the mechanics. He says, if that was esteemed, so much so that Moses, when he went to get them, you couldn't even look at his face. Okay, so his face essentially was veiled. Okay, because that's going to kind of go into this thing in chapter 4. He says, how much more, okay, esteemed shall the administering of the Spirit be? All right? Now, I know he says at the end of that verse 7, he says, the esteem of his face which was passing away, right? So this idea of the things written on stones which were passing away. And what he's trying to say is, again, there's now a shifting to the next covenant. So by passing away, it doesn't mean it's done away. We're now moving on to the next level. So think of it as stepping up, okay? If you know about the Noahide covenant, the Noahide covenant only mentions a very small handful of things. That doesn't mean there was not an awareness of other Torah issues, because we could see evidence of other Torah being known in those days, like when he puts clean and unclean animals differently on the ark. He clearly knew about them, even though those aren't mentioned specifically in the Noahic covenant. But the point being, that covenant was then built up onto the next level. It passed away. We no longer are under the Noahic covenant. Can we agree? It's passed away. But everything in it is in the next covenant, plus more. Can we also agree? And then we get the Abrahamic. And then same, everything's included, plus more. So when he says it's passing away, because we're now moving on or up to the next level. Is that fair? Okay, that's not the way it's taught, I understand that. Because they want to say, done away with, passing away, no good, throw it out, whatever, because now we have this brand new thing. But we don't have any history in the scriptures that that's how they did it. It's a brand new thing, inclusive of the old thing, wrapped up in a whole new package of additional understandings, okay, or additional details. And so that's what you get in with Moshe, is the first time the whole thing was codified, it was codified, it was written down in detail. But then by the time we get to Yeshua, he's like, okay, guys, you've been doing this for a long time, many centuries now, but somehow you managed to miss the point. And I'm here to help you understand the point. I'm not here to help you understand that there was no point, because that's what Christianity would tell you, right? That there was no real point to the Old Testament. That was for them, they needed it, they were stupid, they were this, whatever they want to say, all right? It was a disciplining teacher, which is what we're told by Paul, that the Torah was a teacher, to give us some discipline. Keep these days, don't eat these things, right? Do this, don't do that. Isn't that what we tell a child? Okay? And then when we get older, we expect, and others expect of us, but we expect also to not be told anymore. We tend to have a problem when people tell us stuff. Do this, don't do that. Oh, don't tell me what to do, right? Because we expect we can make our own choices. Now, but the point is, you give a child very clear, now a lot of you aren't doing this, is why your children are running around like crazy people, but you try to give them clear boundaries. That doesn't always work, but some of you have a really big problem because you never even bothered to give them clear boundaries, clear expectations of this is approved, this is not approved. You can do this, you can't do that, right? Now, I'm not saying if you did that, everything would be wonderful. Some children, no matter what you do, they don't listen. It's fine. You see that here. Children of Israel, no matter what Yahweh did, a lot of them still didn't listen, right? Okay, we still have that problem in here, okay? So the Torah was for children. But now, when you get to be an adult, do you just ignore everything you learned as a child? Like you learned, don't touch the stove, it's hot. Don't touch fire, it'll burn you. Do you just forget about that because it was a thing you were told as a kid? Don't run in the street. So now you just run in the street? Okay? I'm just saying it's built hopefully to that next level without ignoring what you should have learned at the beginner level. I mean, it's one of those things that you see this throughout life itself, where things don't necessarily just have a utility for a short time and then thrown away. They have a utility and then you build upon it. And that's what makes the growth. That's what makes the transformation. So what Paul's saying is, okay, just like Yeshua tried to tell them, I'm here to give you the next level built upon the previous level. And he's not saying that Old Testament was terrible. He said it was esteemed. It was esteemed. So how even more so should this next higher level be esteemed? Listen to what he's saying. He said, if the administering of death in letters engraved on stones was esteemed, so the children of Israel were unable to look steadily at the face of Moshe. That's how esteemed it was, because he was glowing, all right? Because of the esteem of his face, which was passing away, how much more esteemed shall the administering of the Spirit not be? Now, the Christians are being told that this is a completely different thing. Okay? But is it really? He's saying this is the next level of this thing that's going away. So if this thing that we're building upon was esteemed, how much more so the thing we're putting on the next level of that? Okay? And so this is not what's being taught, unfortunately. Okay? Now, he says, for if the administering, now he's talking about the administering because now he's talking about himself. He said, okay, you guys, maybe part of what he's dealing with is you guys applaud the rabbis and everybody else is just teaching you the letter and everything, but you don't want to give me any honor teaching you the next level. Because he's talking about the administering, okay? He says, for if the administering of condemnation had esteem, the administering of righteousness exceeds much more in esteem. So he's also trying to say that the mechanics itself is not necessarily righteousness. Because if you wanted to murder but didn't, are you still righteous just because you didn't? Because Yeshua basically makes the argument you've already broken the commandment. Did you commit adultery? No, but you wanted to. So you've broken the commandment. Right? Okay. And so he's saying here, if indeed, again, now we're in verse 10. For if indeed what was made esteemed had no esteem in this respect, in the view of the esteem that excels. In other words, what was made, he said, listen, for indeed what was made esteemed had no esteem in this respect, in the view of that esteem that excels. In other words, if you don't understand that this other one excels, then what was the point of the esteem you gave the lower one? You need to give esteem to the higher one. But it doesn't mean that the one that's lower doesn't have any esteem. I mean, after all, how do we even go there knowing that the voice that spoke on the mountain gave them the letter? The Creator gave them the letter. Through the voice, I believe that was Yeshua, but I'm just saying that this was personally delivered to this people. All right? Now, the next verse. Okay? For if that which is passing away was esteemed, much more that which remains in esteem. In other words, he's still trying to make the point. Stop just only focusing on how great these guys are teaching you the letter. What about the guys taking you up to the next level? But the next level is not like do away with the previous level. It's built upon the next level. It's built upon the previous level. Now, continuing, he says, having then such an expectation, which he's talking about himself now, we use much boldness of speech. It says, we expect that the Spirit deserves more esteem than the letter because we believe it takes you to that next level, the level that brings life, the level that's transformative, where you grow to another level of you. Look, when you transform into the image of Messiah, are you no longer you? Aren't you still you? But I was gonna say another, but a higher level of you? A better version of you? You're still you though. You're not gonna stop being you, but you're gonna be more you, acting like, feeling like, thinking like, making decisions like him, but still you. Your personality, all your wonderful, unique differences that make you fun and interesting and different, right? But we're going to be very similar in the important ways as he is, coming into alignment with his understanding, the spirit of, how about just the spirit of why you exist? In other words, what was the intention in bringing you into existence? Okay? Some people think of it as the letter. Let's just use, I think that's a great analogy he just gave me, all right? Let's look at existence. By letter, we exist, right? We can feel ourselves, we exist, we function, we eat, we drink, we sleep, we whatever. We do all kinds of stuff. And if that's just it, the mechanics of existing, what's at the end of all that? Death. So the letter kills. The letter leads to death. See, but if we understand we exist to transform into him, the spirit of it leads to life. Okay? Is that a good analogy? Does that make sense? So take that picture again. Use us as an example of letter versus spirit. Your existence is the letter of it. You were created, you exist. And you function, somewhat dysfunctionally or functionally, whatever, but you function, and you can make decisions and walk around, and you can talk to people or not, you can interact with people or not, you can kill people or not, you can love people or not, you can eat, drink, whatever you want to do. You can do anything, that's the letter. You exist. Without any understanding of the intention of your existence, that's where you're going to be. What makes us different, wow, this is really good stuff, okay? I didn't know we were gonna go here. What makes us different is that we understand the spirit of why we exist, okay? And I really didn't know we were gonna end up in this place, but I think this is great, because I knew that if I read these verses, he would give me an understanding as we're reading them, okay? Because my notes just says read chapter 3. That's all my notes say, all right? But that analogy, I think, is really, really, really spot on, okay? Now, he made us just like he gave them the Torah. And he made us so that we can walk, talk, do things, whatever, you know. And if that was it, that's the letter of it. What's it lead to? Death. Which you can make, you know, happen faster by being foolish, or you can extend it a little bit by being wise, but ultimately you still end up dead, right? The spirit of it is the key. See, one of the reasons you are here, I mean here like as in this room or those watching, whatever, you're trying to figure out the spirit, not of the law, not of what this or that. You're trying to figure out the spirit of why are you even existing? What was the intention or the purpose, or as he saw it, the depth of why he put you here? See, the letter of your existing is that you exist. The spirit of you existing is that you're to learn how to become him so that you can really live. I think that's a great analogy. Praise Yah, thank you for that analogy, okay? Because that's really where we're at right now. Is as we're looking at this, yeah, we could have this whole argument because we emotionally either do or don't like the Torah. And so you could read this whichever way you prefer based on what you prefer. Or we can understand that he cannot be, pay attention now, this is important with Paul and everybody else, especially with Paul's writings. We should know what he cannot be saying. This is one of the things I teach about context is sometimes you may not know what somebody is saying, but you can probably get to that conclusion properly when you know what they can't be saying. So Paul cannot be disrespecting, denigrating in any way the Torah. He cannot. If he's doing that, take him, throw him out, tear him out of the book. Okay? He can't be. So we have two choices, really. And I tell this to Christians all the time when they want to argue Paul's writings with me. Look, either he's saying what you guys claim, which makes him a heretic, you need to throw him out, or we're not understanding what he's saying because we know he can't be saying that, and we have to struggle to figure out what he is saying. Those are your only two choices, okay? You can't have the third choice, which Christianity wants, is that he's the hero who reset everything. And look, he's not even one of the 12, okay? I'm not trying to insult Paul. He wasn't one of the 12. And as far as apostleship, he claims he's the least among apostles. But he's not one of the 12. He doesn't get a throne to sit on and judge one of the 12 tribes, okay? Which the apostles will get. He's not one of the 12. He happens to be incredibly prolific. And you have a lot of apostles we know nothing about because they didn't write anything or find somebody to write for them. They just did their jobs. And they never get diminished in esteem in the writings anywhere. But I challenge you, almost all of you, to just name 12 of them. Name all 12. I mean, most of us couldn't because they're not talked about very much in terms of what they did. So we don't really think about all the names unless they're actually active. And some of you would start off, well, I can name 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, but they're not all apostles. Some of you are like, really? Yeah, go look it up. Okay? And so you think you got 4 right there, but you don't. So that's not even like the critical point. But the thing is, Paul happened to be prolific in writing letters that happened to be kept and passed down and shared to the point where we have them now in these writings. Okay? But we also have to understand that Paul was not writing general teachings to just the public at large. James does that. Peter does that. Okay? These are letters to specific groups of people dealing with very specific issues, which tend to be, shockingly, very similar in Ephesus, as in Philippi, as in Corinth, as in, you know what I'm saying? Because people are people. I mean, I would say that every group meeting right now on Shabbat probably has very similar issues in their congregations as we do here. Maybe not all the same things, but some similar things, because they're people who live today. And the dynamics of today are very similar no matter where you live. And so Paul finds himself needing to address the same things in maybe slightly different words, but he's addressing the same. You know, how many letters do you read where he's defending his position? It's there, though. And he always says it from the point of view like, why do I need to keep doing this? You guys have tasted of and experienced me. Why do I have to sit here and argue with you and make a case for my role? All right? Of course, I understand it because we end up doing that in this ministry all the time too. Okay, I get attacked and called a cult leader because I talk about being anointed and appointed. I said, I never claimed to be anything. You guys are the ones who have to decide, do you see that? Just like Paul saying, hey, I've worked with you guys in Corinth. You know what you experienced with me. You are the letter of proof that I am whatever I am. All right? Now, because anybody can claim they're anything. The only ones who had above and beyond that were the 12, because he picked them. But Jeremiah didn't have any letters. Isaiah didn't have any letters. None of the prophets had any letters. They got their dreams and visions and whatever. They had their direct contact in whatever way to get them, started on their paths. They could have claimed that and it could have just been all in their head or it could have been real. We have to look at the fruit of it, okay? And the other proofs that are there. But the only people with actual letters, so to speak, would be, well, these are the ones who Yeshua trained directly. And he sent them out with his endorsement, okay? But that's only 12 of those. Well, 13 if you want to count that, Judas obviously died and then they replaced him. But they didn't replace him with Paul, okay? All right, if you read Acts chapter 1, it tells you who they replaced him with. Now, okay, another Matthias, right? Okay, so here we go. Now, let's see. He says, verse 12, having then such expectation, we use much boldness of speech. He's talking about himself now. I have this expectation that what I'm trying to share with you is above and beyond without eliminating what you already think you understand. I expect that this is what brings life. I am not insulting, although some of his language I think sounds a little strong, but he says, I'm not insulting the letter. I just need you guys who are so in love with it to understand it's not the whole message. Okay? It's not the whole message. Christianity has done away with that, so now they're missing that part of the message. And of course, Judaism doesn't want to listen to the New Testament. They don't want to get the other side of the message. So we got two incomplete groups of people, or people who have incomplete messages. Okay? And I was going to say one has got it worse than the other, because in some ways, really, Christianity has it worse only because they have this idea of the Spirit, but they don't have anything to attach it to, so they don't know what they're doing with it. Okay, and the Jews are running around with the mechanics and miss the point of the mechanics, okay, to a large degree. They think this generalized idea is that the mechanics make you into better people, and that's true. But still, if you don't understand the purpose behind it, then you miss really the main point. That's not to say that there's other smaller points, but you miss the main point. He says, having then such expectation, we use much boldness of speech, and not like Moshe, who put a veil over his face so that the children of Israel should not look steadily at the end of what was passing away, but their minds were hardened, for to this day, so now we know what he's talking about. This is the issue he's dealing with. Because he's saying, to this day. In other words, I'm going to tell you this is the problem I'm dealing with. For to this day, when the old covenant is being read, that same veil remains not lifted, because in Messiah it is taken away. What veil are we talking about? The ability to see the spirit of the law, to understand the purpose, the full purpose, the intention of that law. Why that law was given, what was its intention, okay? When we talked about, the spirit in the understanding of the Ruach teaching, the intrinsic nature or the fullness of the intention is what the spirit of something is, right? He says, but to this day, when Moses is being read, a veil lies on their heart. And when one turns to the master, the veil is taken away. The veil is taken away so they can see, without the veil, interfering or filtering, the fullness of the understanding of the Torah. Not that the veil's lifted and they realize, oh, wow, that was not intended for us. That was a waste of time. That was, whatever. That was against us. Or whatever negative thing you're going to accord to the Torah. He says, now Yahweh is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of Yahweh is, there is freedom. So for a lot, if you don't understand the purpose of the law would have felt like bondage. It could have felt like restricting me. You're not letting me do what I want. So I don't have any freedom. There are people that just don't want to come into any of this because they want to just do what they want. They don't want anybody to tell them they can't or that it's wrong. I just want to do what I want. But, James says the same thing when he says, when you look into the Torah of freedom, okay? So he's saying something completely opposite of the problem that, I'm not saying the opposite of what Paul's saying, but he's saying the opposite of the people that are the problem. The people that are saying that they're not understanding that, the Spirit, there's freedom in it is somehow still connected to the Torah. Moses is still involved in here. Paul is not denigrating it. He's not disrespecting it. He's saying it's the childlike level. Now we need to go higher, but without losing. You know what I could not do? Okay, I'm at the store, right? And something is 15% off. Now, some of you can do that in your head, some of you can't, but you know what? You can't do that if you never learn how to add and subtract and multiply and divide. Okay? Because just hearing that something's 15% off, well, what math do you do? Well, I multiply the thing times 0.15, whatever, right? So you have to know how from the basics. Now, if you didn't learn the basics, you wouldn't know how to do the more advanced. But when I learned to do the more advanced, I didn't forget about the basic. I couldn't do the more advanced without the basic. Yeshua didn't say, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of new instructions. He said, of all this instruction, let me take it to the next higher level. This instruction, you're missing the point. Next higher level. Okay? And so let's make sure that we're starting to understand that. So now, because I'm still building into chapter 4 here. So there's a veil that we're going to be talking about into chapter 4, okay? Because it talks about, that's where the verse of the good news came in with dealing with this idea of being veiled. He says, and we all, as with unveiled face, we see as in a mirror the esteem of Yahweh and are being transformed into the same likeness from esteem to esteem as from Yahweh the Spirit. So he's saying is, with unveiled faces, we are being transformed because we can see the esteem to esteem. Esteem to esteem. Could he be saying, I'm not saying I know for sure here, esteem of Torah to the esteem of the Spirit? We see from esteem, which he said the Torah was esteemed, how much more so should the Spirit be esteemed? I think he might be referring to that way. As from Yahweh, the Spirit. And so he's saying all of this is so that we can be transformed. But I've made the argument over and over again that it's the mechanics of Torah done in the spirit of the intention that transforms. It's the behavioral things we learn through the mechanics, and then the inside part through the intention that we transform. It's not just transformative that you keep Shabbat by like not working the mechanics of it. It's transformative when you keep Shabbat, okay? When you're coming at it from the right perspective and you are enjoying it, loving it, resting, fellowshipping, praising, interacting with your Creator, etc. The things intended beyond just not working, okay? Had a big argument one time with a guy who, I'm not gonna mention who he was, but fairly well known in the Messianic world, wrote a book. I argued with him about, I called him up to ask him a question. And I thought it was an appropriate thing to talk about on Shabbat, so I actually called him up on Shabbat because I was home. I knew he was home. I didn't have a place to go in those days, so I thought I would have this little conversation about something that was appropriate for Shabbat. And his wife answered the phone and said he was sleeping. I said, oh, okay, when's he getting up? He says, no, that's what he does on Shabbat, because Shabbat's for resting. I said, you're missing the point, okay? Or at least you're only getting a fraction of the point. There's no instruction that says go to sleep on Shabbat. But it says it's for resting. Yes, resting from the world, seeking your pleasures. You're resting from, it's like fasting. So I know people say, oh, I'm fasting from the news. So what does that mean? They're actually resting from watching the news. I'm fasting from video games. I'm fasting from, so in other words, I'm going to not do them. So the way the scripture would use the words rest. I'm taking a rest or a break from that. So I'm taking a break or rest from the world and from the stresses of the world and the obligations and all the other things of the world. And I'm going to focus on this other stuff for one day. I should be focusing on it every day, but for one day, I'm going to focus on these things. And we find that so hard to do. But it's so many hours. It's one day. How are you going to focus on him forever when you can't do it for one day? Just one day. Okay? Now, so where are we at? So we're just finishing up that chapter there. How much time I've got here? So let's see if I can still get further into this. So then it gets into chapter 4, which is why I read chapter 3. It says, therefore, having this service. So how can I start a reading and therefore having this service without explaining to you what he's talking about? Because I could have started, because remember, we're going to get to verse 3 and 4, which is where the good news verses are. So naturally, I'd go back a couple of verses to get context. And if I go to the beginning of the chapter, the context is, therefore, having this service. What service? What is he saying therefore about? Because, in other words, he's saying because of what I just told you, the next thing I'm about to say plays out, right? Therefore means because of what I just said, this is what I'm going to be telling you now. So I had to go back and find out what was it he said. And I could have gone further back than chapter 3. I thought chapter 3 was enough to make the point, okay? Now, He says, therefore, having this service, what service? To bring the spirit of the law, the spirit of the covenant, the spirit level, the higher level of what they had. Having this service, even as we receive compassion, we do not lose heart, but have renounced the secret of shame, not walking in craftiness nor falsifying the word of Elohim, but by manifestation of the truth, recommending ourselves to every human conscience in the sight of Elohim. He's still defending his position, which is why he says, therefore, having this service that I just described, which is my position in chapter 3 here, and he says, and indeed, if our good news has been veiled, in other words, has not been received fully, in other words, veiled meaning people could not receive it. It has been veiled in those who are perishing, in whom the mighty one of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that the enlightening of the good news of the esteem of Messiah, who is the likeness of Elohim, does not shine on them. Okay? So what is it saying there? He's saying, look, I don't think he's saying they're being punished. He's saying this is being revealed to those who he's revealing it to. And those who are not are veiled. I call this the bubble, okay? And when he pops your bubble, it's like pulling away or popping holes in that veil so that now you can start to see beyond the veil. The veil is the filter. So all you can see is whatever's projected on the veil. You don't see what's actually real behind the veil, okay? But you're just seeing what's projected. Okay, what's the world or Hasatan or whoever it is wanting you to see. You know what, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, the projection of what the wizard was versus going behind the veil and seeing the real guy, right? And so we're seeing whatever the world and society and everybody else has tried to project on this screen, this veil, and that's all you can see. You can't receive and see beyond that. But he pokes holes in that veil so you can say, oh, wait a minute. Oh, there's more out there. What's the deal with the Sabbath thing? Where in the world did Christmas come from? How did we end up on Sunday? Okay? I mean, all of these things start to become questions because we get a little view through the hole. We can just barely see through that hole, and it starts to open up bigger and bigger as we learn and see more. All right? Because he says, so we can be clear, he says, and indeed, if our good news has been veiled. In other words, people were not receiving it. It has been veiled in those who are perishing. In other words, it's revealed to those of you that are living. Now, the perishing, again, means they're in this life, they're going to die. That doesn't mean they don't get a chance. They don't end up in as we talked about in the millennium and kingdom, they don't end up in the millennium and that kind of thing. But in this life, he's just not revealing everything to everybody all the time. As you well know in your frustrations talking to other people. And what I mean by that is you can't talk to a veiled person and communicate any possible way that makes them actually see what you're saying. They can't receive it. You've tried, usually with family members and friends, and they can't see beyond the veil that they have. The delusion bubble, I call it, that they live in. But I like the idea of it almost being like a projector screen that's having the world as they should perceive it projected on it, and they perceive the world through that filter and cannot see the world as you see it, because that has to be revealed by him. No matter how much you try, you're not winning that argument. Anybody tried? Anybody actually win? Okay. You don't win that argument. You can't win that argument. All right? So he's saying is, in whom the mighty one of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that the enlightening of the good news of esteem of Messiah, who is the likeness of Elohim, does not shine on them. So the enemy doesn't want them to see. But you know what? Yahweh can poke the bubbles anytime he wants, so it's his plan, which is why I came up with, or he gave me, the Millennium and Kingdom teaching to understand that plan for those whose bubbles aren't being popped right this minute. Okay? So that you need not fear those people like they're doomed or something, okay? Just because they can't see it now. Because some of us really panic and worry about that stuff because we love people. And we're concerned. I mean, that's a good sign that we're elevating as well. We worry. But we should not feed into the panic part of that, the fear part of that, which is what Hasatan would like you to do anyway, because fear and doubt is his main tool, right? Okay. So, for we do not proclaim ourselves, but Messiah Yeshua, the Master, and ourselves, your servants, for the sake of Yeshua. So he's like, again, trying to make a case for himself. And you would think, this is Paul. Why would he have to do that? We think Paul's the greatest, whatever. Well, they didn't. Well, not all of them. Some of them did. But Paul got accused of everything under the sun, attacked for everything under the sun, and whatever was going on, And so, where are we time-wise? Just look at time. For Elohim, verse 6, who said, let light shine out of darkness, is the one who has shown in our hearts for the enlightening of the knowledge of the esteem of Elohim in the face of Yeshua Messiah. So he's saying it's the one from above has to reveal these things. So for all of you that think evangelism, which Christianity taught you was our main role in life, that's not actually scripturally correct. This idea of proselytizing is for those that were trained to go work with those that are drawn, and not that the drawing would be done by the apostles who were sent out. Matthew 28 is saying, I trained you, now go do what I trained you to do. Those are trained by the Messiah himself. None of us are trained by the Messiah himself to go out and do those things, okay? So if anybody has that role to whatever degree, I guess it would be me. But I do that by putting this out so those that see it, who are drawn, will see it. I do not go up and talk to people and evangelize and whatever Christianity would have taught you to do, because I don't ever see that as my role. The Father does the drawing. None comes, but the Father draws, okay? And none gets to understand the Father correctly except the Son reveals. And we have that in the Father and Son teaching, all those verses that it says exactly that. The Son reveals the Father reveals the Son, at their discretion, in their timing, and you have nothing to say about it. I know that's hard sometimes because we want to have something to say about it, but it's the reality that we live in, and you're either going to accept it or you're not. If you're not accepting it, you're partially veiled still, because you're not seeing things correctly. What's your role, what's his role, all right? So then he says, and we have this treasure in earthen vessels so that the excellence of the power and might be of Elohim and not of us. So he says, he gave this to us in flesh so that we can't claim we're a whole lot because we're just flesh, we're gonna die, and we have our struggles and our frailties and everything else. Being hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, being perplexed, but not in despair, being persecuted, but not forsaken, being thrown down, but not destroyed, always bearing about in the body of the dying of the Master Yeshua, that the life of Yeshua might also be manifested in our body. So again, he's talking about himself now. He's doing all these things, he's making all these efforts, and you can relate to these things too, and find that, you know what? He says, we're pressed on every side. Anybody pressed on every side, but not crushed? Perplexed? Anybody perplexed? Okay. But not in despair. Okay. Persecuted, but not forsaken. See, he's saying these things because a lot of us could end up in the place where we're persecuted, so we feel forsaken. We're perplexed, so we end up in despair. Okay? We're pressed hard, so we start to feel crushed. So he's giving us the tendencies of those that have not leveled up yet. We would tend to feel crushed or despair or forsaken, okay? He's saying being thrown down but not destroyed, always bearing about in the body of the dying of the Master Yeshua, that the life of Yeshua might also be manifested in our body. In other words, recognize that Yeshua died as an evidence of the body must die to then live, to then have true life. That's kind of the analogy he's giving there. For we, the living, are always delivered to death for the sake of Yeshua, that the life of Yeshua might also be manifested in our mortal flesh, so that death indeed is working in us, but the life in you. What in the world? Don't you love the way Paul writes things? He's saying we, the living, are always delivered to death. In other words, we're dealing with a world that basically sucks and is going to be tough, and we're going to be crushed and persecuted and this and that. So we're delivered to death for the sake of Yeshua. In other words, we're willing to take all these, he's talking about himself here a lot, mostly. He's saying, I'm willing to go through all this stuff because I'm doing it for Yeshua's sake. I'm allowing myself to go through these things, be put in these positions because, and by the way, the other day I was talking to even Elder about it. I said, you know what? It really sometimes can get hard being attacked all the time. And then you know who I think about? I actually think about Shaul more than I think about Yeshua even, okay? Because he's not, because I mean, to think of Yeshua, I don't want to compare myself and the things, he has his unique situations. But Paul was certainly attacked, persecuted, arrested, drowned, shipwrecked, and lashed, and everything else that you can imagine, okay? So as much as we think of him as being very popular with his various congregations, he wasn't popular with everybody. Which is why in these letters, he consistently has to make an argument to defend himself, you know? So it's tough. So he says that the life of Yeshua might also be manifested in our mortal flesh, so that death indeed is working in us, but the life in you. In other words, while we might be getting killed, beat up, and persecuted, everything else, we're doing that so that life can be manifested in you, okay? It's a long way of just saying, I'm taking all of this and willing to take all of this so that you might have life. Because in my bringing this message to you, I'm suffering all these things. And I feel the same way. You know, I mean, I'm not the most popular person with a lot of people. And a lot of really nasty things are said about me on a regular basis. And that's not really enjoyable to have. But nobody doing this job is not going to have stuff like that eventually happen. It's just the nature of the business, so to speak, right? It is what it is. Doesn't make it easier, though. He says, but having the same spirit of belief, according to what has been written, I believe, therefore I spoke, we also believe, therefore we speak. Again, he's talking about himself and his role and why he's doing it this way. Knowing that he who raised up the Master Yeshua shall also raise us up through Yeshua, I shall present us with you. For all this is for your sake, so that favor, having spread through the many, would cause thanksgiving to overflow unto the esteem of Elohim. He's saying, everything I'm doing is for your sake. I don't care how you want to word it. I don't care what. Man, he was accused of everything. He was dragged to Jerusalem to defend himself, right? I mean, I'm sure that was a fun trip. He's like, oh boy, I got to go stand there before James, Peter, and those guys, and it's a rough job. It's a rough job. He's saying, but he wants all of this so that the favor, having spread through the many, would cause thanksgiving to overflow towards Elohim, towards the esteem of Elohim. Therefore, we do not lose heart, but even if our outward man is perishing, this is the key to this whole perishing death thing that he's talking about. He's going to explain himself eventually here. He says, we don't lose heart because the outward man is perishing, but the inward man is being renewed day by day. The leveled up man. That next level, Paul. Says the lower level, Paul's dying. Okay? The higher level, the spirit part, is being renewed day by day. Now, of course, he's talking about himself here, but you could take the lessons to yourself as well. Okay? He says, for this slight momentary pressure, did you catch the humor there? I mean, he just described being crushed, destroyed, persecuted, and all these other things in previous verses, right? He says, remember, pressed hard but not crushed. Despair was another thing, forsaken, destroyed. He says, oh, but this moment, this little thing, this slight pressure, okay? He says, for this slight momentary pressure is working for us a far more exceeding and everlasting weight of esteem. In other words, I know there's a bigger picture. Same thing we read about Yeshua, that he was willing to go through what he went through, knowing the esteem and the position he would be in afterwards. So keeping the eye on the prize, so to speak. And the prize being the reason you're here, what you're supposed to be accomplishing, all right? He says, for this slight pressure is working for us a far more exceeding and everlasting weight of esteem. We are not looking on what is seen. What is seen? All this fleshly, death-leading things, right? The world is falling apart. Your body, you're falling apart, and we're all having our issues. He says, I'm not looking at what is seen, but what is not seen. For what is seen is passing away. What is seen passes away. He says, but what is not seen is everlasting. And he's not saying that the stuff we see is just going to pass away. He's saying, the part of you that's seen is going to pass away. The part of you that is unseen, that's becoming Yeshua-like, is everlasting. Is this making sense? All right? All right, let's go before the Father. Father, we come before you, and Father, we're so excited about some of the analogies and the way you've helped us to see and understand what Shaul is talking about here to the Corinthians. And Father, especially to make the point of the next level. That seeing that the mechanics, while vital, were just an elementary level. To be built upon to the higher level. That we would then embrace the intention of what you wanted the mechanics to produce, of how you wanted the mechanics to be approached and to be performed with an intent. And so, Father, we really appreciate that while so much of Scripture deals with the receiving of the mechanics and the trying to walk them out, and people struggle with them somewhat, but then sending Yeshua and then having the apostles then help us to realize there's another level. And that's the level that's transformative. Okay? And so, Father, we thank you and we praise you. We ask that you would continue in your mercy to be patient with us as we struggle against the flesh to focus on that which is everlasting. So, Father, we thank you, we praise you, and we give you all glory and honor in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen. Amen.